Welcome, Tangle friends. My name is Annie, and I am just back from a wonderful vacation in Florida where I visited my dear friend Liz on her horse farm in Davie. Davie is near Fort Lauderdale, and we had a lot of fun hanging out with her family, her friends, her horses, her animals. These are her grandkids. This is her doggie Leo and kitty Jackson. Jackson is a Bengal. This is one of her horses that she boards, and this is her beautiful dressage horse Rose. Here's a view of the gorgeous farm that she has, and we rode directly from that farm into this amazing treetops park. It's a tropical paradise. We got to ride several times, and the weather was perfect. I hung out at the pool. I did my tangling in the morning there. We went with friends to the Fairchild Botanical Gardens in Miami, which was just a very special treat for me and my little botanical heart. We also spent the lunar eclipse, once in a lifetime experience on the beach. And then we hung out with her friends at their places, which were so lovely, and just had a great time. I even carved out some time to teach her family and some friends how to Zen-tangle. I did an actual introduction class there. I taught Liz my Eros tangle as well as some color layering, and we topped it off with a visit to this incredible ancient Spanish monastery in Miami. So as you can imagine, one of the most relaxing things one can do on a vacation is to Zen-tangle. So it was my intention to bring my Just Tangles tags, because I needed to catch up with the Inktober tangles from 2021. Last October, I had no time to do them, and so every day I stepped a few of the tangles out. And in doing so, I discovered one that I really liked that I want to show you today. I promised that I would show you something that I considered sort of tropical, and this is it. This is the tangle Moonesque. Moonesque is by Leslie Feiwus or Feiwus, and I've made a few little variations here, but I thought we haven't done a gridded pattern for a while, and it's always nice to have those gridded patterns, especially for your daily meditations. They make for such great backgrounds. This one to me looked kind of like a palm. There were so many palm trees there in Florida, so many different variations, and they just reminded me of those fanning palms. Also, in a way, it looks like an orange slice, so this could be considered a Florida orange. So that's why I chose this tangle to show you today. This is a mini one, and I am going to do it in green, and I will show you a little bit about how I color on a colored tile. This is one I made with Lindy's Magic Shakers. They are dies, basically, and I did a tutorial on how to do those backgrounds, and I will link that in the description below. I am starting with just a 4 by 4 inch square that I cut up from one of my sheets that I made when I was doing the background washes. And this one I have already divided up into the kind of grid that we're working on. It's basically 4 single inch ticks going one direction, and I'm going to go ahead and use my ruler, and I'm going to just use a pencil to make this grid because it's going to be erased when we're done. We just need it as a guide. So basically you divide your 4 in half and then in half again, or divide your whatever size you have, just divide it in half and then in half again, and then only one way. Here we're only going to divide it completely in half, not in quarters. So we have something that looks like that. as our grid. I chose to use an 05 Micron pen in green, in dark green. Just, it kind of still looks black on here, but it's a little bit less in your face. So what we're going to do is we're going to make little rectangles here, and we're not going to ink those completely out, but we're going to go just to the side of the line. Kind of like aura the inside. I'm going to do that on all of those rectangular spaces. Just basically driving along that line with a very tight aura. Same down here. It's probably easier just to do all the lines in one direction first, and you can turn your tile. Okay, so that's how we're going to start. And then we just kind of eyeball the halfway point on here. And we're going to draw a triangle that has got a little bit of a swing to it. So I'm going to go from here to this corner in each case, and I'm going to bow the line a little bit. So it's kind of rounded like that. So I'm always trying to think about this as being my up-down orientation. And then the next one is going to go a mirror of that. That's why I'm calling this a fragment. So we're not just doing the same thing, but we're going to mirror it. And that's kind of a meta pattern that emerges when we do that. But it's the same stroke. And we're going to do that again here and here. Oops, draw best like this. And then on the one below, we're going to just repeat that again. So you can kind of see now what's happening. We're building sort of a ring in here, a circle. Oops, that's the wrong side. So we want to go from this side. This one probably could have been bowed out a little bit more, but that's okay. So there we've got that. Now we're only going to do one more easy step, which is to aura the inside of these triangular spaces. So we don't want it, this is a rather large square, so I'm going to give it a nice sized aura so it has a little bit of statement on the line. It's not so fine. Don't make it so fine that it sort of disappears in the pattern. Here's this one. So they'll kind of meet up. Take your time. Be mindful of those distances between the lines. Try to make them even. And there is the first part of it. And then we're going to make segments in these circular areas. And that's super simple. All I do is draw a line in the middle, like that. And then divide each of those spaces in half with another straight line. And then we want to do that on all of these segments. So see how it's really beginning to look like an orange. We're always going from the 90-degree angle. Okay, so this is basically the pattern. That's it. So this leaves us to do so many different things in here. You can do different tangles inside these little spokes, kind of like a bicycle. You can do different patterns in here. As you can see on this one, I did moon pie from Zen-tangle, and then I did henna drum over here just to play around and see what to do. On this one I did all henna drums. I think that fits in perfectly with this space here. And what I also did is I weighted the line a little bit out here. So we've done this so many times, it's just adding some line weight to this end, and it's basically sort of like making a triangle on the end of your line. But it adds some interest. It makes the definition of this circle stronger, and it makes it almost look, once we've done some shading, it makes it almost look rounded, right? Almost like these are really juicy orange sections. So you don't have to weight the line if you don't want to. I just like it. Just seems to be added interest. And actually, I have to say, I like the way this green pen, this dark green, is working on this kind of lime green paper. It's almost looking like gray, so it's not such a stark contrast on the colored paper as a black ink would be. Okay, so that is finished, and now we just need to fill in our little triangular spaces here, and I'm going to do that once again as henna drum, which is just like a crescent, another line. You can do 2 lines. There's not a lot of room here, so I'm going to just do the one. Make our little fan blades arced around that center. Can weight the line here a little bit. Do a few eyelash strokes. And you could color this in dark, like I did here. I'm kind of liking it not colored in because it'll shade up really nicely. It'll make it look almost like a gemstone in here. So I'm going to just leave it. There are so many things that you could put in here. So have fun exploring that. I just kind of like the thought of this being an orange slice or an orange section, and then maybe the little orange blossoms. So now we're ready to shade. Already looks kind of pretty, but it will look a lot prettier when we add some dimension with our shading. And I will put the colors in the description, but I'm using today mainly my Caran d'Ache Luminance. I love these. They're very buttery. I do have a Faber-Castell Polychromos in pine green as well. But we're going to start with this. You know, generally speaking, I go from the light to the darkest, but there's some yellow in here, which I might be using this as a burnishing tool. Speaking of which, we will also need our colorless blender. This one is the Prismacolor. It is a solvent blender. You can use a blender pencil or a lighter color to burnish. Burnishing means blending the colors together so that you don't see the stroke marks anymore. It becomes mixed basically right on your paper, the colors do. So we're going to start with this. I chose these for this tile because I just went to my box, held my tile up, and tried to find the colors that were just ever so slightly darker tone in tone than the ones here. So let's start with this. I'm going to do some shading, and if this were black and white, which you can also do, I shade at the bottom and a little bit on the side and a little bit kind of like what we call pillow shading in Zen-tangle. Where you basically kind of shade the whole outside area that makes that center sort of pop. Since they share a side, you don't need to do this on the inside, just this one side here. Now, I know a lot of people just go on here with graphite, and I don't like to put graphite on top of color. It just makes it muddy. So that's why I choose to use tone-in-tone shading with my color. Sometimes it works, depends on the color. If there's a lot of black in it and there's a little bit of maybe red, I can see how that could work with just graphite. But if you put graphite on top of this, it's just going to be gray mud on top of this beautiful green that we don't want to lose when we add our shading. And this will blend out with our little solvent blender. We'll make for a nicer transition. Right now there's kind of a hard line there, but we will blend it out. And like I said, you can also use a lighter color to burnish. It will add color on here, but as you see, there is already a lot of yellow in here. So this is kind of a forgiving paper when you can just kind of pick up some of the other tones in the paper if you'd like, and just kind of bring them in even just wherever you want. Just a little bit here and there, and then it kind of becomes more coordinated. This will add a brightness here, a little bit here, maybe some down here. So that's the first layer, and then I'm going to go on top of this with the pine green, which is kind of a bluish, a little bit of a bluish green, just to give it a little bit darker depth. Okay, now I'm going to get my blender out, and I have a piece of scratch paper here so that I can always clean my tip in between. Just hitting it up ever so lightly, kind of very painterly, almost like as if this were a brush. Trying to stay away from the dark spots because the Sakura, even though it's supposedly permanent, sometimes it picks up with the solvent when you don't want that. But you see how nice and blended that is compared to this one, for example. So I am using 140-pound hot press watercolor paper, and people ask me all the time, what's the difference between hot press and cold press, and why would you use hot press? Well, it's exactly that. When the paper is being made, it's made with these rollers, and hot press is pressed with heat and cold press not. And the difference is the cold press paper is going to be more toothy, more bumpy. It's got a bumpy surface. It's very good for big washes, watercolor washes. But the hot press is more smooth surface, more compact in its tooth. And so it allows us to get a nice fine line when we're drawing with our pen. And then it makes for a nice smooth finish in the coloring process. So that's the difference. If you like the look of having the pencil marks show, which can also be beautiful, you might want to choose the more bumpy tooth cold press. This is what I prefer to work with. It's what I'm used to working with as an illustrator. So there you have all that dimension. Look at this one compared to that one, and then we can actually add even more dimension by giving some highlights. This is a really, I got to get a better white. Here we go. I forgot that this is a Faber-Castell white, and you can just add a little bit of brightness too with that. And look how pretty. And then for the head of drum, I would just also get really dark. Let's start with our lighter color first. Leaving out, making this kind of a sphere, leaving out a light area there. And then maybe a little bit up here, pulling some of it up into the petal. Getting our darker, adding that down here. And then blending it up. Don't forget to clean. And then of course you can also add little highlights with your white. You could also color in the negative space back here, but I really like that kind of more open, lacy look for this. So I'm going to go ahead and finish coloring this all. I'll probably just speed up the camera and we'll be back to look at the finished piece. Okay, so one thing to note is, so I've done my lighter green and now I'm going to get my darker green, the pine green, and I'm going to do my next layer. So I do like to find the rhythm in doing all one color first and then going back and layering up with the next one. That's kind of how I like to work like that, but you can find your own rhythm. And then I've saved the polishing with the highlights to the very end. And in between, I always sharpen my pencil. Make sure that I get into the tooth of my paper. And if you have this, the other thing, if you work with colored pencils on cold press watercolor paper, you're going to wear down your pencils super fast because it will just, just wears down, and you have to keep sharpening to keep that tip going into the tooth of the paper. So that's another reason I choose the hot press. Doesn't look like there's much difference on these two colors, but there really is, because when I blend it out, it's going to illuminate the blues in the pine here that you don't really see as I'm laying it down. Definitely makes a difference. The other one is more of a permanent green or a grass green. Let's see, it's a, they call it grass green, yeah. I'm using a little bit of an elliptical stroke. And if I go like this, I'm not scrubbing really, I'm just laying my stroke very lightly and closely next to the other one. Practicing strokes is what we did for hours and hours on end in our Botanical Illustrators program. You have to master your stroke pressure and fill. I'm using the small tip of the blending tool. You can use the larger as well. It goes faster, but you have a little bit more control with the other one, especially if you're not used to using it. Just like in our last coloring exercise, it's usually best if you want to draw out the dark, you start on the dark and draw it into the light. But if you want your lights to stay light, you start on the lighter side and then go toward the dark, if that makes sense to you. That way it doesn't bleed into the light so much, it stays highlighted. And we don't want to get rid of our highlights. We really want to save those out, because that's what, gives us the value change, the really dark darks and the really light lights. So now I'm going to go do my flowers with the tinier tip, just flicking until I really activate the pigments in those colored pencils. They just start gleaming. They're illuminated, basically. Look how pretty. See, I'm staying away from the highlight because I want to keep it. And just like with our colored pencil, we want this to be kind of a smooth transition, a gradient that you don't see a hard line with. Okay, so just like also in our last coloring exercise, I suggest you go back over and just, get this exactly how you want. If you want a few more yellows or another bit of a dark. Just layer those colors back and forth until you get it just how you want it. Oh, it looks like it did not blend this one yet. Actually, I did, but I'm not finding that coverage good. So I'm going to take my pine green again and just add a little more. That's the beauty of using the solvent blender. You can keep adding layers. If you burnish with a colored pencil, it's over. That's your last step, and you can't really go back, because then you'll start getting a sheen on your surface of your paper that is not desirable. It's called wax bloom. One other thing, I did bring up this other pencil with me. It's a little bit darker and it's more of an olive color. It's called moss green, and it works more as a almost like graphite on here. But if I if I want some really dark darks, like here in the corner of this gem, I can get it by adding a little bit of that moss. It'd be like an olive green in some of the other color names. But you see how that just really pops that corner. Same here, you could add a little bit around here. And you don't have to. This is just finessing and polishing. I'm going to do it to 1 and see what it looks like. I'm going to blend that out. See, even though it looks really gray when you put it on, it blends out differently once you hit it up with the solvent. Because it's also activating with the colors underneath. See how that's nice and smooth now? Really brings your eye to the center. So you can see the difference between this one and the rest of them, right? That's what this addition of this darker dark does. So that's up to you if you want to do that or not. And now I can just polish it up by adding some highlights. We generally add our highlights on one side, right? In this case, we're staying with the left here. You can use your General's white charcoal for this as well. Sometimes the General's does not take to the waxiness of the colored pencils. It just kind of glides on top and it doesn't take, whereas the colored pencil will, because it's pigment as well. I just see that this needs some blending. And you can also, if you don't want that light to be too stark of a line, you can blend it as well. Just hit it up a tiny bit so you get rid of the strokey line. These are these little finishing touches that just make it special. You could also add dark in here and make those recess. If you understand what I mean, I'll do it on this little one. We could add dark here, and then it looks like they're kind of sunken in. I actually kind of like that. It doesn't show up as much on this piece here because it's so small, but let me show you after I blend it, if you can see the difference. You see how that is kind of in the shadows. I like that. Really kind of cool. I think I'm going to do that. So I would take probably this moss green. just on this side and this side of the V. Doing this elliptical stroke, and then when we blend it out, this is too adding a little lighter on top so that it doesn't look so harsh. Yeah, I'm liking that. It just adds a lot of depth. So I'm going to do that just in these triangles, and I'll be back. So there you have Moonesque by Leslie Feiwus, or Feiwus. I'm not sure if she's German or not. It would be Feiwus if she were. So this is not looking like a Florida orange, but rather a Florida lime slice. Have fun with this, and I will see you next time. Thanks for joining me. Have a great day.